Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Advanced Innovative Reporting Capabilities for Microsoft Dynamics GP. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us. There are a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please either raise your hand so that we can unmute your line or submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We'll be answering questions throughout the presentation and also following up afterwards. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Jeff Smith, who is a solutions architect here at Socius. For over 20 years, Jeff has specialized in project management, product engineering, and consulting for Microsoft Dynamics Solutions. So at this point, Jeff, I believe we're ready to transition over to you to cover session objectives.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thanks to everyone who's on the line. I appreciate your time. Just wanted to start off with what we hope to accomplish today. And so first of all, I know that many of you out there are already using Management Reporter, and some of you may be in the midst of getting ready to use it or are new to it. And so our hope is to show you how Management Reporter can make your financial reporting process easier and more efficient. So we're going to talk about a number of things, and our general agenda is going to be, we're going to talk a little bit about Management Reporter licensing. Then we're going to talk about the product itself, and my main goal was to give you some tips and tricks along the way. We're going to talk about the basic components of Management Reporter, including the row definitions, the column definitions, the reporting tree definitions, and maybe some little tools and tips that might help you use those more effectively. Then we're going to talk a little bit about report definitions, report groups, and schedules. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about security. And at the end, we will try to have some time for questions and answers. I have a lot of content. I'm going to try to show you some portions of the solution. So we do have a lot to cover, but if you have a question, don't hesitate to jump in as we go along, or we can handle those at the end, whichever your preference is. So I just wanted to talk real quickly. The current version of Management Reporter is CU13. So as you probably know, Management Reporter, like Dynamics GP, is in a process where updates are provided on frequency, and right now this is the 13th roll-up, so to speak, of Management Reporter 2012. There are two licenses that are available for Management Reporter. One is the Designer, and one is the Viewer, and we'll talk a little bit about that and what that would mean. And then also what I wanted to talk about, some of you, or most of you, are probably on GP 2013 or 2015, and if you are, then you have an unlimited number of Designer and Viewer licenses. If you're on GP 2010 and prior, your user count may vary based upon a variety of different circumstances for which you purchased the application. So that's something that you have to make some determinations on who produces reports and who views those reports. And so when we get into that whole Designer versus Viewer license, a designer is someone who can actually, as it sounds, design a report as well as produce the report, whereas a Viewer license is simply someone who can view the results versus being able to design the output and what it looks like. So and in every organization there are a number of people involved in design, and then the majority are just more interested in reviewing the results and making decisions based upon those. So I'm going to start off by talking about these topics related to the row definition inside of Dynamics GP. I know we're kind of getting into the components of Management Reporter, but we can talk about examples as we go along, and again, ask questions as we go. So The few things that I want to talk about here are folders, linking to financial dimensions. We'll talk about that a little bit. Linking to Excel. We'll also, if any of you are using analytical accounting, we'll talk about that a little bit. And then also format override. So those are just some of the components. I'm going to exit out of PowerPoint. I'm going to go into Management Reporter, and we'll kind of go from there. So as we launch Management Reporter, for those of you on FRX, the concepts are the same. Rows and columns and trees make a report. The labels and the names may be different, but I would tell you that the main difference is that Management Reporter, when it came out several years ago, was a modernization of the FRX solution, which included a variety of nice additions to functionality, as well as a technology platform that we can move forward with. There were a number of limitations that FRX was bringing to the table. So when we talk about row definitions, I'm simply going to click here on the row definitions, and I wanted to start off by talking about folders and hoping that you can take advantage of those. Each of the individual areas will have folders so that you can be more organized. Many of our clients that are on FRX or were on FRX had the problem of just creating a variety of different reports and ending up with a little bit of a sloppy mess in regards to finding things. And so this does allow you to have organization capabilities. So I can simply up here click on right click, create new folder, and this then allows you to add a new folder to the group, and then you can drop reports into that new folder. So I'll call this webinar. And so you'll notice that these other folders that I have are broken down. I put in abbreviations, but I have my balance sheet reports, my cash flow report, my profit and loss reports, and my trial balance related row definitions. So I'm not going in any particular order, so I wanted to first of all say that, you know, beyond the obvious reason that this is nice because it organizes you, there are some other features here that I want to make sure that you're aware of. So first of all, if you right-click on any of the row definitions here, there's an option that is called Associations. And what Associations does is it lets you see where this row definition is, what reports it's related to. So you can see that this trial balance is related to a detailed trial balance, a ledger transaction list, a summary trial balance, and a balance list. So all of these different reports are utilizing the trial balance default row definition. I can do the same with my summary income statement and see that that actually is a part of 5 different income statement related reports. So this is something that's nice as you're trying to just go back, and even if you're doing cleanup work, it allows you to figure out where you're going. So first of all, what I thought I would do is then let's go ahead and just open up this summary income statement row format. And this is then the body of the financial statement. And the things that I really wanted to make sure we looked at here are a couple things. So first of all, the subtotaling capability, you can see that it's very Excel-like. So if I want to add row 130 to 250, I simply put in a beginning and ending with a colon in between. This is actually different for any of you that are using FRX where you put in the word 2 between 130 and 250. So this is something that just makes it really nice. The other point I wanted to make about this is more of a tip than anything else, is on some reports you may have a number of different subtotals and then you want that to total. You can actually do this same format here, taking the beginning and the end, and it will actually exclude the subtotals in between and just add up the sales rows to give you the total. And sometimes that's easier than trying to figure out I need to add row 250 and I need to add row 400, etc. So feel free to use that, and it will definitely save you some time. A couple other things that are important is you have the ability in a report, you may have a variety of different rows in your report that may come in different formats. So you may have a row that is more informational or maybe in a different format than the others. And so you have the ability to simply double click and you'll have the option of changing this particular row from currency to numeric to percentage to some custom format. You can pick the number of digits, etc. So if you're doing something like this, or maybe on your total rows you round to the nearest dollar, those kind of things can be done using this format override functionality. And I hope you can use that because I think it'll save you a lot of time. All right, so another thing that we can do is we have a row modifier, and what this allows us to do is this allows us to change a particular row to a different, maybe a different form than the other rows in the report. So if this particular row needs to be a beginning balance, you can make that row a beginning balance. So if you're doing like trial balance type reports, etc., you have the ability to make some adjustments and make a particular row a different, not only a different format in dollars versus percentages, but also different in regards to a beginning balance versus a normal period balance, etc. One could be year to date, one could be current period, etc. So you have some flexibility in that regard as well. The other thing that I wanted to point out is, and this is the one of the really important things as well, is, and let me remove that, is then we're linking out to Dynamics GP. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this to let you know that you have some functionality that you may have no idea you have. So if I double click on the heading here on column J, you'll notice that these particular columns can actually, we typically would pick financial dimensions, and that's where we're going to go back into Dynamics GP to pull our data. But if for some reason we need to pull some spreadsheet data, or I want to have a mix of spreadsheet data and worksheet data, or spreadsheet data and GP data, then I have the ability to make that choice. And there's also some functionality that allows you to then, in the particular rows and columns, select the cells within the spreadsheet for which this data goes. So I want you to think about that. We've had a number of people that might have some other operational systems where they have data that drops into a spreadsheet. Maybe it's unit account type things or statistical accounts like machine time, or might be head count or things like that. And they'd like to include that information in their financials, and this gives them a way to do that. The other thing that's important to note here is that on each individual row, we have the ability to pick based upon our chart of accounts. So I can, in my case, I have a small chart of accounts with 3 segments. It's a department, account, and a sub-account. And I have the ability to pick and choose if I want to isolate a row based upon that. Or, in my case, I use the account category out of GP, so I can say that this particular row pulls from my sales category. And the nice thing about doing that, and the time it can save you, is that then if you add a new account and assign it to the sales category, it'll automatically be included in that row without you having to make any modifications to the report ongoing. So give some consideration to that, because I think that can actually save you quite a bit of time. Now, the one thing you don't see in this window that I mentioned earlier was the fact that you can include analytical accounting. And so for those of you who don't know, analytical accounting is really kind of a product that sits on top of the general ledger and kind of glues itself to it. What it allows you to do is track activity against things like projects or customers or different dimensions. Some people use it for grants or that type of work as well, without having to build all that in the chart of accounts. So a perfect example might be you're a not-for-profit organization, you have 20 grants, and in those grants you have a number of, say you got 50 different programs that you get money from the federal government on, and you want to be able to track without having to build all that hierarchy into your chart of accounts, then you can use analytical accounting. If you do, then analytical accounting would be included in here as well. It treats it like a like a segment in your chart of accounts. So if I had Grant, Grant would just be another column in this window that I could select from and could isolate to. So keep that in mind as you're using it. A couple other things that people don't use that maybe they just don't know it exists is we have the ability to undo. So if for some reason I, by mistake, remove the credit balance from my sales account, I simply, just like I can in Excel, can click the undo button and it'll put it back. And so if I've made a mistake and I want to undo, I can undo, just like all of my other Microsoft tools that I use. Another thing that I can do is I can copy and paste. So I can copy and paste rows. So I could simply do a Control-C here. I can open up Excel and then drop the information right here. Now, what I've seen people do here is something like, maybe I want to sort all of my accounts in alphabetical order or something to that effect. What this allows me to do is copy it out into Excel, use Excel to do some of the formatting, and then copy it right back into Management Reporter. Okay. So I'm not going to save that, but you get the idea. So the copy and paste functionality with Excel. Also, we've seen people that were moving from FRX to Management Reporter will copy and paste right into new of these as well. So there's a lot of different things you can do. One last thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to rows that can save you a considerable amount of time, but also give you some leverage to be able to provide more powerful financials, is you have the ability under this option called print control to actually make a row or two or multiple non-printable. The nice thing about it is they could be included in totals, they could be used for calculations, but you may not want to show them on the financial statement itself. So we've seen a lot of people use this non-printing row, and an example might be you might have a revenue line or a sales line, and then you want to show sales per salesperson as a calculation. So, but you don't necessarily want to say that we have 12 salespeople on the financial. So you could have a row with the unit account, which is the number of salespeople, and hide that row, and then have another row that takes your sales and divides it by the number of salespeople. So that kind of thing. It's just something that you can consider. So the row definition gives me quite a bit of flexibility. It gives me the ability to really isolate rows by particular portions of my business. It allows me to shortcut by using categories or analytical accounting. It gives me Excel-like feel to allow me to do subtotals and copy-paste and things like that. Plus, you have now the new feature that was added that gives you the undo functionality. So that's an example of the row format and some of the ideas that I thought might be useful for you using this row definition. So with that, I'm going to move on. And next thing we're going to talk about is our column definition. So I'm going to jump back into our PowerPoint for a moment, and we will move on to columns. And so what we're going to talk about on the column side is we're going to talk about folders just like we did on the row definitions. We'll talk about column headers. We'll talk about attributes here. Some of the powerful things that I wanted to show you here are conditional columns, because I think conditional columns can provide you with a lot of functionality, especially if you're using if you're doing forecast type reports where it's a rolling 12 months, where you want to print a report, and depending on the date of the report, you may show a budget or an actual. Those kind of things can be done using the conditional columns. We also have the ability to do what are called dimension filters. So this can be powerful as well in regards to allowing you to isolate a unit within your business, whether it be a department or a location or a branch or even a company, into a particular column, and then have those departments or branches or companies across columns to give you a report that really gives you perspective on the activity going on across all of your units within your business. We'll also talk about print control, just like we did before, and then also associations. So with that, I'm going to go in and we'll leave the row definitions, and we will now select our column definitions. So you can see here that I have a folder, and I can create more folders the same way that I talked about before by simply clicking New Folder. It'll create a folder. So if I do that and call this webinar, oops, I can actually then copy some reports into that folder, just like that. So, and I can move them around. One of the other things I didn't mention on the row was the fact that you actually have the ability with the columns on the folders, on the reports that we'll come across here in a little bit, to actually assign security to those. So one of the things that's going to be really important for you is that this financial data gets into the hands of the people that it should, while not getting into the hands of people who don't need it. And so it's just like any other kind of business reporting. We want to make sure that you can secure it to the greatest degree. So we do have the ability to put security on those particular folders, and we'll talk more about security as we go along. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this folder, and you'll notice that I have a variety of different column definitions here. And that's the nice thing about this is that you can have as many column definitions and row definitions and even reporting trees as you need, so that you can put together reports that are a combination in the right format. So the first one I'm going to bring up is our 12-month periodic trend. And notice again that I can come over here and I can see this particular row format and what report it's associated with. So you can see here the 12-month trend income statement is what this particular format is used for. From a column heading perspective, we have the ability up here to do a couple things that I think can be important in regards to deciding how this report's going to look. So first of all, we have the ability to use some automatic text. So here, some people feel like they always need to put like a month heading or a period number heading on some of their reports that are laid out this way. And we actually have the ability for the system to auto do that for us, so that we don't have to really go back in and make adjustments each month to make sure that the report looks the way we want. We've had clients that actually will use Excel to take their data and drop it out there so that they can clean it up, and they really don't need to do all of that, because we have the ability to do this as we need to right here. All right. So the other thing that I think is interesting, and I don't know if any of you are using this kind of report, but I bet some of you are, is if you do any kind of reporting where you have 3 columns that are current period, budget, and variance, or current period, last year, and variance, those kind of things, but current period, budget, and variance, and then have 3 more columns that are last year, current period, budget, and variance, so that you can do comparatives as to your activity this year versus last. Well, in those cases, sometimes people like to spread a heading that might say current year, or it might say year to date, or it might say last year, and then spread the heading across multiple columns. And so this functionality allows us to spread from a particular column to another particular column, and then you can decide whether you center it, right, or left justify it. So just from a formatting perspective, that is something that can happen automatically, and again, one less reason to take your reports out into Excel. All right, so the other thing I wanted to talk about in this is I'm going to go ahead and leave this particular report, and I'm going to actually just create a new column definition. And so when we're creating a definition like this, let's say I'm going to do budget versus actual, budget, a forecast report that would have each month across columns, but it'll either be the budget or the actual numbers depending on where you are in the year. So what we can do is start to build a report that looks something like this. I can pick my financial information. I can say actual. I can actually go in and I can pick a particular period. Oops, I'm sorry. Pick a particular period. So I could actually say that this is period 1. And then I can come back and I can do another period, another column that is budget, and I can come in and pick which budget is appropriate, and then I can make this period 1 as well. So you can see I can come up here and change base to 1. Now, where I can make this conditional is I can come down into the print control option right here, and I can say down here I have the option of saying if the period is less than the base period, and then I can say and click OK, and then I can say this one is if the base period is greater than that period. And so what will happen is then depending on the date of the report when I print it, it's going to print one or the other. And so that's what we can do with conditional. And that way you can create a 24 column or 25 column report, and depending on the date you select, it'll only print 12. It'll always only print 12 based upon the conditions or the date that you've selected. So my hope is that something like this, if you report this way, from a forecast perspective, this can save you a lot of time. Okay, hope that made sense. So the next thing I wanted to show you is I'm going to create a new one again, is I wanted to show you creating a column that that we can set aside using different units within our business. So I'm going to come in here to the column type, and again I'm going to select description in the first column. But let's say the next column is going to be financial information, and maybe it's even going to be year-to-date information. But what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to say that I just want to do this, have this column include my corporate group within my organization. And so what I'm able to do here is I'm able to isolate a column to a particular group within the organization. I can do the same thing and this time select a different group. So I could select my administration group. And this actually is leveraging what we call our reporting tree, but I also have the ability to do this filtering a different way. So I could create a column this way and then go into a dimension filter, and this allows me to pick it using my chart of accounts. So I can either use my reporting tree, or I could say that this is for department, in this case 200, and click OK. So there's just different ways of getting to the same end. The reporting unit functionality is more important and is the method for which you need to use if you're consolidating companies, because the reporting tree, as you'll see in a little bit, actually allows me to consolidate companies as well as units within my chart of accounts or within my company. So hopefully that made sense, but the idea is that this allows me to isolate by column, either using the chart of accounts if I'm working within a single organization database, or it'll allow me to cross databases the other way. So keep that in mind. This is just one way of going about it. Okay. The other thing, while we're here, under this print control where we saw our conditional options, we can also make columns non-printable. And so this is another way for which you can include data in your report but not necessarily print it. So maybe you're using it for some sort of calculation, and this will allow you to do that as well. So we see lots of opportunities where that happens, and it really is up to you as to how you make that work for your organization. Okay, So we are 30 minutes into our hour. We have covered row definitions and we have covered column definitions. Cheryl, has anyone asked any questions yet?
We did have a couple questions about the webinar or the recording being available afterwards. So we
Okay.
will make sure to send that out to everyone in case you want a copy of today's presentation. And to remind everyone, either raise your hand and we'll unmute your line if you have a question, or you can type it in to the question box.
Okay.
Jeff, can you use both the reporting UNT and dimension? Oh, unit and dimensions?
Yes. Not. I would have to check. I've never tried to use it within one column, but like for the example that I have set up right here, I definitely can leverage the unit in this column and the reporting unit, or I'm sorry, the dimension in this column and the uh, reporting unit in this. I would almost say, I don't know if they'll work together or not, but in most cases what I've seen is that the reporting unit, and when we look at reporting tree, this will make a lot more sense. Typically, all of what you would use the dimension filter for, you can build into your reporting tree. So you don't necessarily have to use both. And so, keep that question. If that's still a question for you after we finish up, then we'll go back over it again.
Said for a consolidated report, use the tree, but report only on one department.
Yeah, but we can do that, and we should be able to use both in the same column. I've never done it that way, but there should be no reason that you can't. All right. So let's move on. Oh, I'm sorry, Cheryl. Are there any others?
Yes, 1 second here.
Okay.
How do you add the subtotals in the rows? They missed that part.
Oh, okay. Well, sure. Let's go back to that. So let's bring back up our summary income statement. And so one thing I didn't go into too much detail on that I can spend a couple minutes on while we're here is notice that we have, for instance, here a subtotal called total revenues. And so what I can do here, and what we can do is we can select what goes into this row. So in this example, we're saying that this row is a total. And from this row, I can then, from that, whenever I have a total, then I'm going to go over into this column D and I'm going to say, what is my beginning and ending row that should go into this particular total? So in this example, everything from 130 to 250 goes into total revenues, and therefore you just put in the beginning, a colon, and the ending. And the point I made earlier, just to reinforce it, is, and now this has a lot of adding and subtracting, but in FRX, I would, if I want, say for instance, each of these subtotals totaled to this bottom line. So I would have 280 plus 400 plus 760 plus 910. So in FRX, I would have said 280 plus 400 plus, and what I'm saying now is Management Reporter is smart enough to say, I don't add the subtotals into this, I'm just going to add the rows. And so I could put, in this case, I could put 130 to 910, or 130 to 850 as a matter of fact, and it would add them all together without including the totals. So that's new, and that's new to Management Reporter that didn't exist in FRX. So I hope that answers your subtotal question.
So I think we're good to move forward.
Okay, good. Thank you, Cheryl. All right, so the next place I wanted to go is the reporting tree. And so the reporting tree, and I will say what I've seen is this tends to be, at first, the most confusing part for people to get their arms around inside of Management Reporter or its predecessor, FRX. But in reality, it is a very easy way for you to be able to build your hierarchy for your organization. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and we'll get into this when we get into the reports, I can create reports without a reporting tree. I have to have a row definition, and I have to have a column definition to make every one of my reports. Whether I add a reporting tree ultimately becomes up to me. And so when we get into the reporting, I'll show you the options of how that works. But really, for any organization that has either hierarchy within one organization or hierarchy within one organization but has multiple organizations and wants to consolidate them, the reporting tree becomes just the absolute way to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a couple examples. So I have created a reporting tree called Consolidated, and let's see, hang on. And by the way, I'm glad this came up even though I forgot it was going to. We have the ability to secure every one of these different row formats and reports. So in this example, I had to put in my password to get to this reporting tree. So in this example, what I did is I created an incredibly simple reporting tree. I have two companies, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a consolidated, and then I'm going to define my first company and my second company, and it automatically will create this graphical presentation of what that roll-up is going to look like. In this example, I'm not really getting down into departments or divisions or branches or any of that kind of stuff for consolidation purposes. I'm simply saying that my reporting tree is I have company 1 and company 2 and I want to roll them together. So that's one example, and this is how we can do consolidations. The last thing I wanted to say about that in regards to company consolidations is oftentimes our clients will actually also build a third company for an example like this that might be an eliminations company. So all of your eliminating entries would be entered through the elimination company, and then you can add all three together to get your consolidated financials. So anyway, so I'm going to close that one. I'm going to show you one that's a little bit more detailed, and this one is within one company, so you can see that the company column is the same all the way down. But what we've done is we've isolated units and given it description, and how have we isolated it? By this dimension functionality. And so in my example, I'm using the department to isolate, and so I may have multiple departments and I have individuals who lead those departments, and those individuals get a financial statement for their individual department. Then we can roll those together at the top and have a consolidated organizational financial statement as well. So we do have some flexibility also in regards to being able to do something like this. So if I right-click on this line, I can insert a reporting unit. Notice it's just like Excel. I inserted a row. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the company. And let's say, for instance, Jane Doe is in charge of admin and accounting. Notice that I now have a branch over here. And so there's two of these, and they look redundant, right? But what this one's for is just for the tree, and this one is for what goes on the report. Okay, so I can say administration and accounting. All right, and notice that I'm not going to put a department label on this one. But what I can do over on this side is I can then say, okay, administration rolls here, and so does accounting. And so what this gives me is this will give me individual reports for these two departments, and for that manager who runs both departments, a consolidated report. And so we can do the same thing, whether it's departments or companies or however you see fit to get the kind of reporting that you're looking for. Okay? So there's a couple other things that I wanted to make sure that you were aware of here.
Before we move forward, can we get one more question in here?
You know we can.
Okay. When we upgraded to GP 2013, the companies now are the original company number, C100, and then also added a C100-CUR. Which one do we use in creating a tree?
Well, that's something you'll probably want to talk to your consultant about. And one thing I haven't talked about, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that there are, when Management Reporter first came out, there were two ways to implement it. One was using what's called a data warehouse, and one is more the traditional, the way FRX was. And so depending on how it was installed, it's going to have one or the other, or it may have both. And in which case, you probably need to talk to the folks who actually implemented your Management Reporter so that they can tell you which is the best way for you to go. Now, I have a data warehouse, and so I'm using the CURR, and it works for me. But unfortunately, I'm not sure of all the technology behind the data warehouse to give you the ultimate answer on that. Any others, Cheryl?
No, thanks, Jeff.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so a couple other things that I wanted to talk about here is that there are some, as you know, if you've worked in here, there are a variety of different columns across here, and so I just wanted to talk about a few of them. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was the row. Let's see. I wanted to talk about the row definitions. Now, in many cases, if you have multiple organizations, you probably have the same chart of accounts format in all the companies. But we have some organizations where they have a convenience store and a manufacturing facility, and there's no relationship, and they need different reporting. And so because of that, they actually may have different row definitions for their different companies because they're so polar opposite of one another. So another thing that Management Reporter has the ability to do is it has the ability to consolidate financials from companies that have different charts of accounts. And part of the way they do that is by assigning a row definition to each individual branch of the tree so that you can roll them together. Okay, so this is an example of where you might actually use that. So another thing that I wanted to make sure that you are aware of is in the case of partial ownership, you can have a roll-up percentage. So if we have 70% of a company, we can do calculations that way. We also have the ability to assign unit security. And so what this allows me to do is this allows me to assign a user or a group to a particular branch of the tree. And so what I was going to talk about here is the fact that you actually have the ability to produce a report and you can publish it to SharePoint. So if any of you use SharePoint for an intranet site, you can publish your financials there, and someone can launch the report, but based upon their security can only see the pieces of that report that are pertinent to them, or what branch of the reporting tree is theirs. And so we have complete flexibility in regards to being able to assign security at that level. So that is definitely something that you'll want to take into consideration. We do also have an option here for having non-printing units, just like we can do rows and columns. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. Okay. That's really all I wanted to cover in regards to reporting trees. And hopefully that made some sense. I'm going to go ahead and close this down. And so now to get kind of into the meat of the issue, ultimately you're doing all that work to create all those rows and those columns and those reporting trees so that ultimately you can distribute reports to the proper individuals in the organization in the format that is appropriate. And so I may have row definitions for my income statement, one's in summary that I send to the bank, and one's in detail that I analyze in the accounting department, and one is in the middle that goes to the board. And so those are that's kind of the flexibility that you get using the management reporter. So I'm going to now go into the report definitions, and there's a few things I wanted to make sure we talked about here. So first of all, before we go any further into that, there is also what's called a report wizard. And so for companies that have a real simple layout, you can actually easily create a report on the fly. And this will actually walk you through the process of creating an income statement with current year to date, an income statement rolling quarter, an income statement actual versus budget, or a monthly trial balance. So the system can actually walk you through selecting accounts. So if this is an income statement, I might start down here and insert a group of rows. And I can use my shift key and I can copy all this stuff in. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but you see how that works. Then I can click next. And so if you want to change the order of the rows within a section, select a row and then click move up, you can do that. So you can highlight and I can say I want to move that up. I also then have the report look, it's kind of showing me shading total lines so you can kind of get into some formatting. One report for the entire company, or I can create multiple reports based on a segment, and I can basically go through and create a report. So this is the idea of, I'll just call this report wizard created, and I'll call it webinar sample. And so we will then click next and then basically click finish. And you'll notice that I now have a report. And it created a row format for me. So if I wanted to look at that, there it is. And it creates a column for me. So I can click here. All right. And then it will produce a report. Now this data is a mess, so hang with me here. And we'll come back to this. But I just wanted you to see that we can create reports on the fly using a wizard. So it makes it kind of simple. So depending on the complexity of the financials you need, you can do it that way, or you can get more involved in a more detailed creation. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. All right. So there's a couple examples that I wanted to show here. So first of all, again, we have folders, and we can put different reports in different folders. There are different types of reports I can create, and I thought it might be nice for you to see this. I can actually create trial balance reports here as well. And then I also can create balance sheet reports and cash flow reports, and I have a little bit of all that stuff here. So I'm going to show you a couple examples. So I'm going to select the trial balance that I've created. And as you can see here, this is basically the form for which I can then go out and select the period for the report, the year for the report. The system will say, okay, this report is using a particular row definition, a particular column definition, and if appropriate, it would also allow me to assign a reporting tree. There are certain pieces of functionality that that I can change on the fly. There's headers. I can import images or logos. I can put different text in different sections. So I can create these and they can be different for each one of my reports. In my output, I wanted to talk a little bit about this. All of the reports in Management Reporter, and this is very different than FRX, all of these reports go to a report library, and that library can then you can go back and you can print prior versions of a report that you've created. So if you printed one yesterday and then you've entered some entries and you want to go back and look at what it looked like before, you can go back and do that. So there's some great flexibility from that perspective. All right, so now what I wanted to do is kind of show you a couple things. On the row definition, what we've got here, and I'm going to have all of my accounts from my chart of accounts, and I was able to do wildcarding. And I simply put in the account and an asterisk. And by doing that, I'm telling it that I want every account from my chart. So it's very simple in that regard. Then in my column definition, I wanted to bring up one more thing. So a lot of times when people print reports, they want to be able to see information like attributes of the transaction. So I want to see the date, maybe I want to see the voucher number, maybe I want to see the vendor. So what I have the ability to do is create these columns that are attributes, and then I can pick from a variety of different attribute options. So I can have the originating master record name, so that could be the vendor name or the customer name, or the item number from inventory, all that stuff that flows out of the subledgers into the general ledger. I have the ability to put in document numbers. So you can see here I can have the originating document number. I can have dates from those transactions, etc. And then I can even pull in the description that comes from the subledger as well, all by using this column type of attribute. And so all of this information will then allow me to produce a report, and I will actually get to that report here in just a second. I'm going to close that column, and I'm going to go ahead and generate the report. So what happens now is that there are two different ways to output your reports, and what you're going to see is there's a web view, and then there is also a drill down view. FRX only had a drill down view, so what you're going to see first is you're going to see that the web view and what it looks like. So we'll start with that, and it takes it just a second, and we should have a report. Is there a question, Cheryl?
There is a question while we're waiting. Does the default mean these are default reports that we can customize within the application?
All of these reports can be customized, and you can create as many different forms of a report as you need to. And you can also copy one form and turn it into another with modifications. So this is the trial balance and where we start. And you'll notice that I'm in a browser, basically. I can drill into it. So if I want to know where this amount came from, I then can see the debits, the credits, etc. I have the ability then with the attributes to then also drill into, let's see if I can find an account, and that'll be what it looks like. Now, the last thing, and I'm not configured for this, but if you're a GP user and a Management Reporter user, I then have the ability to drill into these individual transactions right back into the documents inside of GP. Now that exists if you're a GP user and a Management Reporter user. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now I have a couple other examples. So attributes is something that you may want to take advantage of if you're doing any kind of detailed drill down reporting. I wanted to also then show you the 12-month trend income statement. And we'll go ahead and select this one, and we'll generate this report. Okay, so now this is more like the report I was telling you about before, where you can actually put columns across with different months. Now, one thing I wanted to show you here is I can also then download this to Excel, or I can download it to the Management Reporter Viewer. Okay, so I'm just going to take it in the Viewer just so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so this is the report library. So I can go back and look at prior versions of this, but there's a couple things I wanted to show you here. So if I highlight this salary expense line, I can go in and say select row, and if I notice that that the month of January was really high on salaries, I can add comments. So if your company goes through a review process on financials, then you can actually put in notes that can be tracked along with this. So I could say salaries were high in January, due to extra temporary, if I could type it'd be dangerous, hiring. And I can click OK. And now what you're going to notice is that there's now a little note here. So the next person in line, if they're reviewing this report, can see that note. The other thing I wanted to point out is we've highlighted this row. I can also do a little bit of trend reporting as well. So you notice here that I have a graph, and I can actually highlight salaries and see them across the year in this example. And so I can highlight a column or I can highlight a row, and I can do this kind of reporting. Okay, so time is running short. And I value your time, so I want to make sure I get through everything else. Hopefully that made sense. So I'm going to close this report down. All right, and so the last couple things I wanted to cover are report groups. So let me close that. I want to cover report groups, and I happen to have a report group called 12-month reports. And so what this allows me to do is this allows me to put groups together. Any of you that used FRX may have known about the feature called chaining. This allows you to create a group, and then you can produce the group all at once. So in this example, I have this 12-month reports group that has 2 reports in it. I can add or remove as many of those as I need to. And I can put security on these as well. And then lastly, what we call report schedules. And what report schedules allows us to do is it allows us to go in and actually schedule either an individual report or a group, and I can say that I want my 12-month reports to print once a month, and I want them to print on the, let's say the, whatever day I pick, or I can say I want the first Thursday of every month, those kind of things. And I can have it recur for as long as I want. It can be never ending. So you can schedule these, and part of the advantage that Management Reporter brings is it takes advantage of SQL Server, which it's based upon. Okay. Hopefully that made sense. Last thing I wanted to cover, and I will spend just a split second on it, is then we can define security at the user level, at the group level, or at the company level. So I'll just show you. Here is James Meyer. James is set up as a viewer user, and all he can do is drill into Dynamics, and he can export and print reports. That's all he's allowed to do. But if we look at me as a user, I'm set up as an administrator, and I can do everything. And so you can define user security, you can define security at a tree level, and then you can define it at a folder level. And the one thing is, if you put security on a folder and you have security on a tree, and the report in the folder has tree level security, then the tree overrides the folder. So just keep that in mind. So with all of that, I am going to exit out of here. I'm going to go back, and we will then go all the way to our closing of our webinar. And I appreciate your time. I'm sorry I went a little long. So, Cheryl?
Thank you, Jeff. And Looks like we don't have any questions right now, but if you want to either raise your hand or type them in, we can get to those here in a minute.
Okay.
And a couple of things we wanted to mention here, all upcoming events and current promotions can be found on socius1.com. Our next GP User Monthly webinar will be on December 9th and 10th, covering the year-end closing procedures. And then Microsoft licensing is increasing user pricing January 1st, so we want to make sure those of you on module-based licensing or business-ready licensing purchase before the 1st of next year. And the rest of the promotions can be found there on the site. There's a 15% off data archive tool and 20% off payroll tax filing solution. So a lot of good stuff people are offering there at the close of the year. And this is Jeff's contact information shown on the screen here. So if you do have additional questions that you think of after the presentation, we will be sending out a recording of today's presentation along with the slide deck, and Jeff's information is there on the screen if you do have questions that you think of after today's presentation.